Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more particularly from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the great. Welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can take part in the conversation by typing your questions or comments into whatever platform you use. This program here in my chat room, and we can interact directly. This is one of this program. So welcome everyone. I am happy to be spending this time with you, and we're going to talk a bit about mediumship and oracular work. As you know, I've been doing this work for many, many years, and also general psychic work as well. I'm going to take a moment to plug myself and to remind you that I am again available for psychic readings if anyone's interested. And I'm going to make a special offer to viewers if you set up a reading with me in the next 3 days, that is Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. You can have a 20% discount on the price. So if you're interested, that is my offer. And I hope you'll consider it. Simply instant message me or contact me through donlewishp@aol.com. And hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room. Hello to Janet Winston. Hello to Brenda Tersieva. Welcome all of you. It's good to see you. And hello also to Alicia and to Brenda Pagande and to Michael and to Renee. Hello, everyone. And so we were going to talk today about mediumship, and I'm doing a seminar on Saturday through my Patreon on the subject of mediumship and oracular work. And it was suggested for today's subject, hello to Lisa Stevens in the chat room, good to see you, Lisa, that this would be a good subject to speak to today, a little ahead of the seminar, to give people a bit of a taste of it. Hello, Bradley. So what to say about mediumship? One of the things I was talking about yesterday is that different traditions look at how to do mediumship in slightly different ways. What spiritualists do is not exactly what Iceans do. What Iceans do is not exactly what Correllians do. What Correllians do is not necessarily the same thing that ceremonials do. And there are lots of different words for this process, but basically you're bringing through the essence of a spirit or spirits in a deeper trance than what would be entertained for spirit messaging in so far as clairvoyance, for example, your ordinary clairvoyance. You can certainly bring through messages in a light trance, and I do that all the time. But what makes an oracle is that it's a deeper trance. And it works the same way, it's just deeper. And how do you control that? Well, to some extent, you don't really. You have to go into it, and to some extent, it's the interaction between you and the spirit. I mean, you do at one level control it, and at one level, it simply happens. Now, in certain backgrounds, the Icean background, Correllian background, for example, at lustrations and in ceremonies, an oracle is often invoked specifically, and there's a particular process for this. And it is not something that you would necessarily do alone, though you can, but it's part of a ceremony where it has an importance for the group. Every major Icean liturgy begins with an oracle. In many cases, it begins with two oracles, The oracle that Lady Olivia originally brought through when she wrote the liturgy, followed by an oracle on site, which is unique to that enactment of the liturgy. But although I believe Lady Olivia intended originally that her original oracles were for example, and that in doing the liturgy, I think she had expected the spontaneous oracle to replace that written oracle. In fact, Lady Olivia is so venerated and her oracles so treasured that they are usually read. And that is an important part of Icean liturgy. In Corellianism, oracles show up in a variety of contexts, but most importantly at the lustration. And our oracles are from the ancestors. Now, Michael says, can you clarify specifically what spirits you are connecting to? And how do you know that you're connecting to the right things? So I'm going to say, firstly, the spirits you're connecting to depend in part on who you're connecting to, and also the background you're working with. I was just talking about Icean oracles. Iceans work with a wide range of deities, and their oracles are almost always from those deities. And they believe that they are explicitly bringing through specific deities, who are almost always identified as such. In Corellianism, the most common oracles are from the ancestors, who always speak as we, because they've been invoked as we, as the ancestors. A specific ancestor may speak in a private oracle or in other circumstances than illustration. But at illustrations, in my 44, well, more than 44 years of experience, it's we. And yes, you can bring through an oracle from a specific ancestor, but that usually is in a different situation. Also, when we do initiations, there are often oracles, and they usually are from the ancestors or from spirit, which is the universal power. But if you were from a spiritualist background, doing mediumship, you may be speaking to the spirits of the dead, which is also something that I work with. And many Iceans and many Corellians also work with this, but it usually is not termed oracular work. It's simply mediumship. Also spirit guides, who, as we were talking about the other day, generally are spirits of the dead who are assigned to you and are your guides. Now, how do you know if you're connecting to the right things? And there are a couple of answers to that. And one of them is, if you have a good relationship to your guides, your gatekeeper guide is in control of who can come through. And you should really not have anything to worry about. If you're doing this with a pure heart and pure intent, and you're working with your guides, and you do regular grounding and shielding and all of that, the idea that you'd connect to the wrong thing is, I think, virtually unthinkable. It's the kind of thing Christians are afraid of because they want to be afraid of, and because they want other people to be afraid. Now, if you're doing mediumship with the spirits of the dead, yes, you can get spirits who are disquieted, who are angry, who are in a place of pain, but that's part of the reason you do mediumship, to offer healing to those spirits. But you should have the training to do this before delving deeply into it. But if you do feel that you've connected to a spirit that you cannot handle, the answer is the same as in any situation. You ground the energy. You break the connection, you immediately ground the energy, and they cannot do anything without energy. The answer is always ground out the energy. And Raven says, who is the gatekeeper and how do you work with it? Every person has a certain number of spirit guides. I come from the background that suggests that it's not a universal number. Some will have more than others, but 5 is a normal number. And the chief guide, for one of a better way to put it, is also the gatekeeper. If you work with your guides, you may know the identity of your gatekeeper. My gatekeeper is my grandmother Mabel. If you don't know the identity, you don't really have to. You can simply address them as gatekeeper. They'll make their identity clear if it becomes relevant. Not everyone necessarily has specific names for their guides, and it depends on your relationship to them. And we were talking yesterday about how some people have very different relationships to their guides. I was speaking about my late wife's guides, who were very severe. And I made the comment that if I had had guides like that, I would not be doing this work. They would be the kind of spirit, as they expressed themselves to her, that I would not want to deal with. But they were what she needed for whatever reason. And we were talking about how the relationship influences how they manifest. And Michael asked if this is different from the chakra spirits in second degree. Completely different. We probably should talk about that one day, because that is a very particular technique for personifying and working with chakras. And I won't say that, I mean, obviously, if you have studied that, you know that you can communicate with them. Obviously, you could bring through messages from them if you chose, but that's not what we're talking about here. But it is not a completely separate technique, because you're using the same chakras to do it. Whenever you're bringing through messages, whether it's through low trance, high trance, whether it involves visualization, meditation, or not, the chakras you're primarily using are your crown chakra and your third eye chakra, and perhaps your throat chakra. I won't say no others are ever involved, but those are the primary chakras that you will be working with. And those are the places you'll feel the energy, if you in fact feel the energy. And sometimes that energy is very intense. As that energy comes through, depending on your experience level, it can be very intense. It can be a literal physical feeling of pushing the message through. It often is accompanied by a headache until you bring the message through. We tend to call it a spirit headache, because it's their announcement they want to talk to you. It tends to be in the front part of the head. And if you bring through the message, it goes away. Because it's in that crown chakra and third eye. Sometimes it will manifest in other parts of the head, because the crown chakra has its own unique structure. And all chakras have a number of different points within them that can be worked with. If you've done chapter 9 of second degree, you'll know all about that. Chapter 9 is the chapter that people either love or hate. There's no question which side is larger. But it's important to know how complex these structures actually are. But if you have a good relationship with your guides, if you have a good background in energy work, and you really should have no problem, in my opinion. I think the idea of people having problems is created by people who oppose the idea of psychic work. And, horror movies will tell you that things go terribly wrong, but actual experience doesn't necessarily say that. I'm not saying nothing can ever go wrong, but if you've learned how to do it properly, and if you're doing your grounding, your shielding, you're working with your guides, you have a good relationship with them, nothing negative should be able to get into you. Nothing negative should be able to be around you, even. Because that's what this is all about. That's what the shielding is all about. That's why we do all this grounding, in part. All of these things have their reason. And you might look at our lessons for psychic development and say, well, I don't need to do that part. And my answer is, well, yes, you really should. It's there for a reason, even if you don't see it at that moment. And that is perhaps the thing that we should remark upon at this moment. When we're talking about those different backgrounds, some of them emphasize things like grounding much more than others. A lot of backgrounds, and I certainly um, don't disagree with this idea, would say that if you're going to do this kind of oracular work, you should do it within a protective circle. And I would say if you have any concern about what you might connect with, that's probably one of the best ways to avoid that. But there are other ways also. And again, if you're just well trained and in a good place, you should be just fine. I always have been. And so those are my thoughts on that. But when you do channeling, like any other psychic act, it's very important to ground um, the excess energy in your system, both before and after, and to certainly not retain it within yourself afterwards. I've known people who hated grounding because they loved the feel of the energy, and of course you do. It's wonderful. At least on occasion, it's wonderful. Now, sometimes it can be a little much, but you must ground it or you'll become unbalanced energetically. And hello to Deb in the chat room. Good to see you, Deb. And Michael says, so do I think Diane Fortune was a little overboard with their psychic self-defense book? Yes, I do think she was. But I think she came from that background that instilled a certain fear of these things. And that she was coming from that background. She also, I believe, had I guess I'll say a very Victorian view of certain things. Were the things she wrote important and good? Yes. Do I think she was a little over concerned with it? Yes, I do. And hello to Monica in the chat room. Good to see you, Monica. But then if you've studied under me, if you know me, hello, Diane. It's so wonderful to see you, Diane. If you know my work and the way that I teach, I take a very chill approach to all of this. I am not the oogie boogie psychic person. Hello, Anna in the chat room. Good to see you, Anna. Oogie boogie psychic people are a dime a dozen, to be honest. And media helps them to get to that point. And I've often talked about the paranormal researcher who every time finds a demon in the basement. And the demon turns out to really be a poltergeist, very obviously. But they have to be all oogie boogie about it because that's how they were trained. And also what their viewers want to see. I think there's a whole industry coming out of conservative Christianity to make people afraid of psychic and spiritual work. I think Ed and Lorraine Warren were one of the worst examples of this kind of thing. I have no respect for their work. I think they did tremendous damage to people's understanding of spirituality and the psychic arts. And hello to Serenity in the chat room. Good to see you, Serenity. I think that generally speaking, this is a perfectly natural thing that you should not come into with fear because there's no need for it, as long as you are developing it in a sensible way. Now, I've often referred to that radio show years ago, Ouija board, psychic tool, or gateway to hell, hell, hell. And the conversation in that show was between myself and Howard Heim, who is a highly respected paranormal person, but has a diametrically different point of view from me. But when it was time for him to explain why Ouija boards were dangerous, he started with a story about a group of drunken frat boys who took their Ouija board to a graveyard specifically to have a spooky experience and were then shocked when they got one. Don't mess with magic if you don't want to get what you're asking for. And don't ask for a spooky experience if you're trying to do legitimate psychic work. And no, I don't think it was the spirits who gave them the spooky experience. I think it was their higher selves because it's what they wanted and they were drunk. And Michael says drunken frat boys are dangerous no matter what they do. And that's probably true. But I think that generally speaking, when you hear horror stories about people with psychic experiences, I think you should take them with a big grain of salt. I once had a woman try to tell me that she had been at a Ouija board session where her cousin was killed because the planchette flew off the board, lodged itself in their throat, and killed them. As if this wouldn't have made the newspapers, and as if I didn't see the movie Witchboard, which is where that scene comes from. Jesse says fear sells, unfortunately. That's exactly the case. I know that I could have made Reverend Don's vlog a much bigger program if I talked about oogie boogie things or spoke in an oogie boogie way. I refuse to pander that way. Jesse says it's a cheap way to raise frenzied energy and not very useful energy, but there it is. And I totally agree with that. I have worked with the psychic arts for, well, really 50 years, since before puberty. And I'll tell you, there's no need for that. Yes, you can have those experiences, but usually if you programmed yourself for it, and also if you're not doing it right. So learn to do it right. We made a whole school so you could learn to do it right. We're making a new school so that more people can learn to do it right. That's not going to put you in the middle of a horror movie. And if you're looking for a horror movie, this really isn't the work for you. It's not what's actually there. And Jesse says, I wholeheartedly appreciate that you don't take the oogie boogie road. Thank you, Jesse. You know, I was once asked, completely innocently and well-meaningly, why it was that dolls were the most haunted object in the world. And my answer was, since when is that true? It's absolutely not true, but it is a product of people like Ed and Lorraine Warren who have given that impression. But if you look at traditional ghost experiences, dolls are completely absent. I can't think of a single one historically. And if there is one or two, there's one or two, but certainly not the most haunted thing. And the reason for this is largely an episode of The Twilight Zone that involved a haunted doll named Chatty Cathy, I think, and caused a lot of hysteria rather than a legitimate phenomenon. Now, I'm not going to say there is no legitimate phenomenon, but it's not what it's made out to be. And that's true with a lot of horror stories about psychic work. It's true with most all of them. But I will say, poltergeists are a real thing, but usually not a horror story. And Michael says, is there even a most haunted thing? And maybe a house, I guess. And yes, that actually would be my answer. Houses and other locations are the thing most commonly haunted. Second thing are body parts and or items that killed people, in my opinion, based on my studies. There are a lot of stories of haunted skulls, for example. I was talking about the Lawrence Museum of Magic and Witchcraft on one of these programs, and one of the things they had was a haunted skull, which they had been given from a museum in Indianapolis because too many things were happening. And the Lawrence Museum was actually a fully accredited museum. They were able to receive it. And they united it with an item which, if memory serves, was believed to have killed the lady to whom the skull belonged. And as soon as they were united, there was no more paranormal activity. Her ghost would be seen sometimes because she was still attached to it, but no more paranormal activity. But in the museum, things had been moving around, glass had broken unexplainedly, because they'd separated these two items, and she did not want that. Jewelry is not uncommonly considered haunted, but I think there's a question as to whether it's haunted or merely carrying an energetic charge. I talked about the voodoo ring of the Queen of Kokomo. I think during the evening with Corellian ancestors, this was a beautiful ring that supposedly carried a terrible curse. But I would say to you that most likely it carried a powerful charge from the way she used it that was meant to keep other people from handling it, not a direct connection to her spirit. So I wouldn't call it haunted. Cursed if you must. Enchanted, I think, would be a better term, because it was meant to keep it out of the hands of people who she felt should not be dealing with it. And who knows what she was doing with it? I don't. It may have been better kept out of those hands. Michael says, I've seen jewelry that had memory imprints on it, never any that was haunted. Yeah, that's one of the things I'm saying. And a lot of hauntings might better to be described as memory imprints. I describe them as a portion of the soul being caught between the worlds. But it's not always a big part of that soul. Very often, the majority of the soul has gone right on across, but left only what was caught in that situation. So when we do shadow work, when we work with that shadow, sometimes we find those caught pieces of ourselves that are caught in past lives that we've led and not been able to move on from them, even though we have, but not all of us has. So when you cross over a spirit, you may very well also be freeing part of the energy of a living person. And hello to Lilith in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lilith. These are all considerations that do come up in mediumship. Now, oracular work usually is a term we're using when we're speaking to deities or what might be called saints or ancestors, who are viewed in more or less the same way that you might use the term saint, which is used in Christianity, but also in Hinduism and other places. Lilith says, is it me or is the image stuck? For me, I see everything still moving. I don't know, but if I am stuck, please people let me know. Lori Jo, hello Lori Jo, it's good to see you, says, accurate psychic information is far too rare. I happily agree. She says, I'm so grateful for this talk. Thank you, friends. And I really appreciate that, Lori Jo. And that is my point of view, that all too often, people who work with psychic matters want to take what we'll call the oogie boogie road. And I think that's very damaging. Now, I understand this in horror films. It makes good campfire stories, but that's a whole different thing from reality. And the reality of psychic work is that it's actually kind of mundane in a lot of cases. And Lilith says that I'm moving for her again, so yay. It has a lot of rewards. There are a lot of adventures. There are some really wonderful things that will happen. But if you're looking for a spooky oogie boogie adventure, for the most part, unless you're easily put in that mind frame, it's not what you're going to get. Now, there are times you'll get physical manifestations. There are times you'll get very remarkable things, but they should not frighten you. On the contrary, they should be your confirmation. I talked during the Night of the Correllian Ancestors about a particular ritual I was involved in once, where the spirits kept opening the door to announce their presence in a way that could not be otherwise explained. The door never opened by itself. There was no wind to force it open. And the final time they knocked, which removed any doubt. But there was nothing frightening to us about that. It merely caught our attention because they really wanted us to know they were there. It also possibly had to do with the presence in that ritual of someone who was not normally present at our rituals, who did work more with physical phenomena, which was my late wife, or would become my late wife. And it is worth noting that different people have different skills, different ways of manifesting these things, and this is true in mediumship as well. Some people will have those physical manifestations. I'm just as happy that I don't. And I think I was trained specifically not to, and I'm just as happy with that. And Michael says, we all just want to be that psychic from the Amityville Horror. Wasn't she cool? I loved her. But yeah, that's generally not, in fact, I would go as far as say you're never going to get that. But there are occasions when you will need to cleanse the energy of a house. You may need to do healing for a spirit so it can cross over. And these are just as fulfilling as a room full of mutton corpses would be. In fact, I think a little bit more so, because I would just as soon not have that experience. But it was a great movie. And so with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. So I want to thank you for watching. I want to remind you, if you are a viewer of this program, for the next 3 days, I'm offering a 20% discount on my psychic readings. You can instant message me or send me an email at donlewishb@aol.com and reference the broadcast, and I'll give you the 20% off. And you can schedule it for any time you want, but the price is only available for 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Saturday. So with that, thank you so much for being here. I love you all. I quite enjoyed this conversation. Michael says this was a fun one, or although he might be referring to the movie Poltergeist. But thank you, everyone. I love you all. I love this time with you, and let us close, as we always do, with our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to remain grounded and sensible in our approach to everything in life. Help us to enjoy our lives immensely, but help us also not to manufacture problems we don't need. Help us not to choose hysteria over common sense, but rather to remain grounded in all that we do. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I love you all. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you tomorrow.